Hello and welcome to this video, which is going to get you the top grades, I hope, in your Lord of the Flies question, which is coming up shortly. So the first thing I need to teach you is that whatever the question is, it's really just about two themes. One is what is human nature, and the other is about leadership. And when we talk about leadership, we're looking at the political systems that Golding has in mind. And when we're talking about human nature, we're looking at the idea of original sin and whether men are inherently evil in comparison to women. So both these themes come up no matter what the question is. So in our specimen paper from 2014, do you think Piggy is an important character? Well, that's really either a question about his leadership and why, being the most intelligent character, he still isn't chosen as the leader, why being the most feminine character he isn't chosen as the leader, or it's also about human nature. How does he show what's best in human nature and what's worst? How does he show Golding's view about what human nature is like? Or the next question you could have had is about the importance of the beast. Well, the beast, of course, is simply a reflection of that original sin, that capacity for evil and violence, that is, in human nature. So basically, it's those two questions in a different form. Let's see if that works for 2015 specimens paper. How does sorry, it's not Golding, I dictated this. How does Golding use the setting of the island to explore some of his ideas in Lord of the Flies? Now this feels like a really rogue question. Oh my God, how am I going to write about the setting? Top ability students will have spotted some gorgeous descriptions of setting, but you don't have to, because really what you're asking yourself is, okay, Mr. Salles tells me this is really a question about human nature or leadership. Okay, well, let's think about where all the moments of leadership happen and where do they happen, and then I'll ask myself why Golding set it there. So you've got all these crucial decisions that are made by the boys in different places on the island. Why does Golding set them in those places? So why do Piggy and Ralph meet first at the lagoon? And why does Ralph become the leader in that situation? What happens when they find the dead pilot on the mountain? Who goes up to see them? What's the importance of that setting to the leadership on the island? The island is described as being scarred by the arrival of the children. What does that say about human nature or leadership? So the leadership has led to this tragedy, or human nature has led to this tragedy, and so on. You could easily go through this question, not really being able to describe or quote the settings, but you'll have answers for why those settings are important, because you'll be asking yourself, what do they reveal about human nature, or what do they reveal about leadership? And those are the two ideas that you would be writing about. Let's look at the alternative. At the start of Lord of the Flies, Piggy asks Ralph, aren't there any grown-ups at all? How does Golding present ideas about being a grown-up in Lord of the Flies? Well, that's those two questions together, isn't it? So you're going to talk about what sort of grown-ups are created by human nature. You could definitely write about the ending of the novel there. And you could also write about what kind of grown-ups have become leaders. And you'd look at what happens to Ralph and Jack. Again, at the ending, what have they learnt? And as you know by now, I hope, I always want you to write about the ending of the novel, because that's where the author reveals their ideas most. That's where Golding will make us think most deeply about what he really believes. And of course, you could just simply then go through all the characters and say, why they would make good leaders or bad leaders, and just link that idea to what they'd be like as adults, because Golding is using them as symbols of what the adult world is like. The island is a microcosm for the macrocosm of the world. Okay, let's look at the third specimen paper. How far does Golding present Jack as responsible for what happens to the boys on the island? Well, that again is really a question about leadership, isn't it? And if you want, it could be a question about human nature. Does Jack represent all of us? The second possibility you had was in Lord of the Flies, Golding presents a depressing view of human society. How far do you agree with this view of the novel? Well, that's just again a question about human nature, or if you prefer, a question about leadership. It's depressing because we end up giving control to the leaders who are least suited to leadership because we allow them to exploit our fears and use violence to control us. Yeah, so you can see that every single question comes back to those two ideas. How does Golding present Ralph as a leader in Lord of the Flies? All right, that is a question about leadership. Next, this is 2017, sorry, and then Ralph, not wet, Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart. What does Golding have to say about human nature? Oh, there it is again, thank you very much, in Lord of the Flies. Let's look at last year's question. How does Golding present Simon as different from the other boys on the island? Well, that again comes back to either what Golding is saying about his human nature or actually what he's saying about Simon's kind of leadership, which is visionary, it's profound, but ultimately tragic because he's killed. You'll know that he's an exact parallel. His death is a parallel of that of Jesus. If you don't, you obviously haven't watched my videos on Lord of the Flies. I'll put them up here as cards that you can link to. But again, whatever the question, as I keep showing you, it's really about human nature or leadership. And then finally, the head is for the beast. It's a gift. How does Golding present the importance of the beast to different characters in Lord of the Flies? So again, the beast is really a question about how our human nature has allowed this to be created, or it's about how we are led by our fears and therefore choose leaders who try to prevent our fears but also stoke them in order to control us. And you can bring into that all the obvious Christian symbolism connected to our human nature and original sin. So I am 100% confident that the question will either be on human nature or leadership. But let's now look at what aspects might possibly come up. Well, my guess is that the human nature question will be a repeat of the question about Piggy, and that the leadership question will be a repeat of the question about Jack. So here is a little plan for you. I'll just go and number it for the top ideas to write about Piggy. So Golding presents Piggy as the superego. He represents society, the society that they have left behind. He represents morality and conscience. And in contrast to that, Jack represents the id, the part of the mind that simply gives in to emotion and desire. And then the other contrast is Ralph, the ego, who tries to mediate between the id's desire and the superego's sense of morality. So what happens on the island is that the superego is destroyed when Piggy is killed, and this then allows Jack's id to take full control and lead to the eventual slaughter of all of them on the island. So if you think about the ending, had the cruiser not arrived, the whole island would have been burnt. Yes, the boys would have survived in the sea, but they would have returned to an island without food and without sustenance. It's very likely they would have starved, and also the natural corollary of that would have been that they would have started killing each other and eating each other. You know, that's possibly what would have happened next once Ralph had been killed and his head put on a stick. Now, we don't get that ending, but it's implied. So that gives you a Freudian analysis of the novel, if you choose. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, because there are 3 other interpretations you can go for. So Piggy also represents the female. He's the one who keeps talking about his auntie. It's the only female character in the novel. We also have him with the name Piggy, and the pigs in the novel are female. So Golding is writing about a patriarchal male society, and he's criticising male power. That's why he doesn't put any women on the island, any girls, and the one feminine character, Piggy, he makes sure is killed. There's this very sexualized description of the pig, which is killed as a victim of a sexualized attack. I'm not going to go into that now. If you haven't studied that aspect of the play, that might, of the novel, sorry, that might surprise you. But it's really done in a graphic way to remind us that men exploit women in the most cruel ways, and that Golding is writing about not just human nature, but male nature. And this is also contrasted to the role of the pig as a mother, which is nurturing, just like Piggy is. He's the only nurturing character on the island who tries to look after the others, and is therefore killed. We can argue that Simon also tries to look after the others by bringing them the message of hope, but he is also eaten, remember, killed before he can deliver that message. Piggy also represents rational and logical thought, and through his glasses and the production of fire, he also represents science. And Golding uses that to show how all those positive things can be overrun by unchecked emotion and instinct. And what he's suggesting is that as a society, we've given too much power to our instincts and our emotions, and this is why we choose violent people to lead us. He has in mind, of course, the terrible dropping of the nuclear bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in Japan, and therefore the novel is set in a Third World War following a nuclear disaster. Again, if that's news to you, you really need to watch my videos. He's also showing how science gets abused in war. He also represents how the logic of science is also abused in war. So it's Piggy's glasses that lead to the fire, which will save them, which it does at the end, ironically, but it also leads to the complete destruction of the island. Now that's an exact parallel of the invention of nuclear weapons. It saves us in the sense that it puts an end to the war, but in Golding's view, it's also going to destroy us because it's given us the power to destroy the earth. And this was a very, very real fear in the 1950s, far much more of a fear than it is now, even with Donald Trump with his finger over the button. And we've kind of forgotten the fear that people in the 1950s had. And then finally, Piggy is used as a symbol of the working classes. So significantly, he is shown as more intelligent than the other boys, but because he is working class, he is treated as inferior and therefore is powerless to persuade the other boys. They all come from private schools, they're all socially superior to him in status, and therefore they ignore him and abuse him. And we can also make a link to the fact that he's also feminized as the female character on the island, and this is another reason that he's powerless and abused by the others, because they're all male. So if Piggy comes up, grades 7, 8 and 9, yes please, that's now going to be easy. And now if the question is about Jack, well that would be great. He is a symbol of Englishness. That's why we have the Union Jack, that's why the name was chosen. And so it's traditional for you to interpret Jack as the kind of Hitler-style dictator, but actually Golding is being much more profound than that. He's saying actually the difference between the Germans and the English is only one of national boundary, but in terms of human nature, we're just as likely to throw up dictators who are evil as any other country. And Jack symbolises that. This comes out of Golding's wartime experience. So what he's saying is that the capacity for evil is universal. You're going to be able to link that to the original sin and the snake imagery, how Jack is the one who latches on to the idea of the snake, and you could also link that to his eventual savagery. Another point that Golding is making is that Jack represents the upper classes. So he is the natural leader on the island, He's the only one who arrives with a leadership position, and he's the only one who arrives on the island with a knife. And this is quite strange, actually, because in Golding's time, many schoolboys, if not most, would have carried knives with them, but they don't have them. Jack does, and this symbolises that his nature as a ruler depends on him being upper class, but also depends on him being violent. In other words, the society he has left values violence in a leader. So it's a natural expectation that he will become leader, and that's why he's shocked when the boys don't pick him, they pick Ralph. But we might see the novel as a tragedy that Jack is picked when he shouldn't have been, but I think Golding is arguing the opposite, that Jack is actually the only logical choice given the class system that the boys have come from. And so this symbolises the brutality of leadership that public schools promote. Remember, all these boys have come from empire. They haven't come from schools in England. They're all being educated abroad. That's why they end up on this particular island. So they're all part of that imperialist establishment. They are conquerors. They are the children of leaders who, if you like, suppress and oppress the peoples that they govern. So again, that links savagery to Englishness as well as to human nature. We've already seen how he represents the id, and he doesn't understand his own emotions, or the forces he's dealing with. And this shows how, I think, in war, fear will justify any action. So we quickly lose sight of any emotional control, and that, of course, is reflected in the killing of Piggy and also in the killing of Simon. Jack also represents nuclear war, as we've just seen. He's the catalyst for the self-destruction. So we think the true horror is that he's pursuing Ralph with a view to killing him and cutting off his head. But actually, in a way, that's the least of his problems. He's destroying the island and their very future in order to destroy Ralph. The Deus ex machina, this idea that God arrives just in time to save everybody from tragedy at the end, is used ironically with this white uniformed officer coming along to save them. You need to watch my video on the ending of the novel if that doesn't make sense to you. But actually this salvation from total destruction is just in the nick of time, and Golding is showing that actually in real life things probably won't turn out so well just in the nick of time. It's only working like this in fiction. Ultimately, Jack also offers us a brief amount of hope in that he is saved at the end. So there is the possibility that he will have learnt lessons from the island and his part in it. However, the quotations at the end suggest actually that it's only Ralph who's developed any kind of compassion. So Golding is balancing two possible futures. A future in which Ralph's compassion does lead him to be a brilliant leader, or a future that's still based in a warrior culture, still based in war, and Jack's savagery will still make him the future choice as leader. And the fact that they're taking off in a warship to go back to war strongly hints that perhaps Golding is saying Jack has been stopped now, but the chances are the future will be a repetition of what's happened on the island. So it's up to you to decide, how pessimistic you want to be about the end. Now, as you can see, I totally love this question because it also asks you to write about the ending in such detail. And if neither Jack nor Piggy come up, my apologies, but you will remember that it's still a question about human nature, no matter what the character is, or it's about leadership, no matter what the character is. So, go out, smash this exam. You're so lucky to be studying this novel because it's so easy to get a grade 7 in because the ideas are just so rich. See you soon on my channel.